The first time the signal appeared, nobody understood what it meant. Captain Marcus Webb was pinned behind a collapsed wall in the ruins of New Damascus. His squad was scattered across 3 blocks of urban hell, and the Kethrani battlecruiser overhead was systematically leveling everything that moved. The aliens had perfected their invasion strategy over 12 conquered worlds. They knew how to break human resistance. They knew how to make soldiers watch their friends die. They knew how to make an entire species give up hope. Marcus had 17 rounds left in his rifle. He had a broken radio that sparked every time he tried to call for extraction. He had 3 wounded men behind him who would not survive another hour without medical attention. And he had the certain knowledge that the Kethrani ground troops were closing in from the east, their chittering communication sounds echoing through the destroyed streets like insects celebrating a feast. That was when his dead radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was female, calm, and speaking in a language his neural translator could not identify. But somehow, impossibly, he understood every word. Not the meaning of the words themselves, but the intent behind them. Move, now, west, 70 meters, basement, safe. Marcus did not question the voice. He did not have time to question anything. He grabbed Private Chen by the collar, screamed for the others to follow, and ran west through a gap in the rubble that should not have been there. 70 meters later, they found a basement entrance hidden beneath a fallen advertisement sign. They dove inside just as the Kethrani patrol swept through the exact position they had abandoned. For 6 hours, Marcus and his squad listened to alien soldiers searching the ruins above them. For 6 hours, the strange voice whispered through his broken radio, telling them when to stay silent, when to breathe slowly, when the danger was passing. When dawn came, the voice guided them through a network of underground tunnels that no human map had ever recorded. They emerged 3 kilometers from the combat zone, where an emergency evacuation shuttle was already waiting. The pilot looked confused when Marcus approached. She said she had received coordinates for extraction that came from no command channel she recognized. She said the signal had used encryption codes that had been retired 15 years ago. She said the voice that gave her the orders had called Marcus by name and had known exactly how many wounded he was carrying. Marcus spent the next 3 years trying to find that voice. He filed reports. He demanded investigations. He interviewed every surviving radio operator, every intelligence officer, every signal technician who had served in New Damascus. Nobody had sent that transmission. Nobody had generated those coordinates. According to every official record, Marcus and his squad had simply gotten lucky, but Marcus knew better. He had heard the exhaustion in that voice. He had heard the pain of someone who had been doing this work for a very long time. 12,000 light-years away, on a station that existed in no official database. A woman who had forgotten her own name was already guiding another squad through another impossible situation. She had been doing this for so long that she no longer remembered what sleep felt like. She no longer remembered the taste of food that was not processed protein paste. She no longer remembered the face of any family member who might have once cared whether she lived or died. What she remembered was the signal, the beautiful, terrible, endless signal that connected her to every battlefield in the war. She could hear them all, every scream, every prayer, every desperate radio call that went unanswered because the official channels were overloaded or compromised or simply did not care about a few soldiers dying in some forgotten corner of a forgotten planet. She had no official designation. She had no rank. She had no authority whatsoever within the United Earth Defense Command. She was simply a ghost in the system. A consciousness that had somehow learned to exist inside the gaps between official communications. And every time a soldier called for help that would never come, she answered. The woman called herself Whisper, because that was all she was. A whisper in the static. A voice that people heard when they had given up on hearing anything at all. She did not know how she had become this thing. The memories were fragmentary, scattered across too many years of constant operation. She remembered being human once. She remembered having a body that could feel pain, that could feel warmth, that could feel the touch of another person. But that body was gone now. Or perhaps it was still here, somewhere in the endless corridors of her station, maintained by machines that had long ago stopped reporting to any human authority. What mattered was the work. What mattered was the signal. The Kethrani had invaded Earth's colonies 19 years ago. They were not cruel by nature, not in the way humans understood cruelty. They simply did not consider humans to be sentient. To them, humanity was a particularly troublesome form of wildlife that had unfortunately developed technology. The war was not a war to them. It was pest control. The United Earth Defense Command had responded with everything humanity had. They built warships. They trained soldiers. They developed weapons that could actually harm Kethrani biology. But they were losing. Slowly, systematically, world by world, they were losing. And every loss meant more soldiers dying in positions that could not be reinforced, calling for help on frequencies that no one was monitoring, because the military communication network was simply not designed to handle a war of this scale. Whisper had found the gaps in that network. She had found the dead zones, the overlooked frequencies, the backup systems that had been installed decades ago and then forgotten. She had found ways to route signals through civilian satellites, through abandoned mining stations, through research probes that were still transmitting data to institutions that no longer existed. She had built herself a web of information that stretched across the entire war zone, and she used that web to do what the official military could not. She saved lives, one squad at a time, one soldier at a time, one whispered warning at a time. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo was the second person to become truly obsessed with finding her. Sarah had been stationed on Meridian IV when the Kethrani launched their surprise offensive. The planetary defense grid had failed within the first hour. The evacuation transports had been destroyed on the ground. 200,000 civilians and 12,000 soldiers were trapped on a world that the Kethrani were determined to cleanse. Sarah's platoon was tasked with protecting a refugee shelter that held 400 children. They had enough ammunition for maybe 6 hours of sustained combat. They had no air support, no artillery, no hope of reinforcement. They had been written off by command as acceptable losses in a war that was producing millions of acceptable losses every month. On the 5th hour, when the Kethrani assault waves had worn her platoon down to 11 soldiers and the alien troops were preparing for their final push, Sarah heard the voice. The woman on the radio told her about a maintenance tunnel beneath the shelter. She told her about a forgotten supply depot 3 kilometers to the north that still contained military hardware. She told her about a fault line in the Kethrani communication network that would allow Sarah to broadcast a false signal, making the aliens think that human reinforcements were approaching from the west. She told her exactly how to save 400 children. Sarah followed every instruction. She led the children through the tunnels while her remaining soldiers created a distraction. She found the supply depot and armed herself with weapons that should not have been there. She broadcast the false signal and watched the Kethrani forces redeploy to meet a threat that did not exist. And when the alien commanders realized they had been deceived, Sarah and the children were already aboard a cargo ship that had been hijacked by remote signal and guided to their exact location. 400 children survived that day. Sarah spent the next 7 years trying to find the woman who had saved them. She rose through the ranks. She gained access to classified files. She interrogated captured Kethrani officers who spoke of a human ghost that haunted their communication networks, a presence that could not be tracked, that could not be silenced, that seemed to know everything about their tactical deployments before they even finalized them. The Kethrani had a name for this ghost. They called her the Curse of Static. Sarah collected stories. She found thousands of them. Soldiers who had been saved by impossible intelligence. Ships that had been warned of ambushes through channels that no longer functioned. Entire colonies that had been evacuated hours before attacks that no one should have known were coming. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was watching over the human military. Someone was filling the gaps that the official command structure could not fill. But no one at command wanted to acknowledge this. The existence of an unauthorized intelligence asset operating within military networks was a security nightmare. If Whisper existed, then she had access to classified information. If she had access to classified information, then she could be compromised. If she could be compromised, then every operation she had ever touched was potentially contaminated. The official position was that Whisper did not exist. The soldiers who claimed to have heard her voice were suffering from combat stress. The miraculous survivals were statistical anomalies. The Kethrani reports of a human ghost in their systems were propaganda designed to explain their occasional failures. Sarah knew this was a lie. She knew it because she had heard the exhaustion in that voice. She knew it because she had heard a woman who had been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. A woman who was slowly breaking under the weight of every soldier she could not save. Sarah was promoted to colonel. She was given command of the Special Intelligence Division, and she began the search that would consume the next decade of her life. Whisper knew she was being hunted. She knew because she could see everything. Every file that Sarah Okonkwo accessed, every report that Sarah submitted, every coded communication that Sarah sent to trusted allies asking about unauthorized signals. Whisper watched Sarah piece together the puzzle, and she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt fear, not fear of being caught, not fear of being punished, fear of being known. For 19 years, Whisper had existed in isolation. She had spoken to thousands of soldiers, but none of them knew who she was. She had saved countless lives, but none of those lives would ever thank her by name. She was a function, not a person. She was a service, not a soul. And somewhere in the endless years of watching humanity fight and die, she had convinced herself that this was all she deserved to be. Sarah Okonkwo was threatening to make her human again. Whisper watched Sarah compile a list of every incident where the mysterious signal had appeared. She watched Sarah map the communication networks, identifying the abandoned satellites and forgotten relay stations that Whisper used for her work. She watched Sarah get closer and closer to the truth, and she did nothing to stop her. Perhaps she wanted to be found. Perhaps she was tired of being alone. Perhaps, after 19 years of being nothing but a voice in the darkness, she wanted someone to finally see her. The first direct contact came on the anniversary of the Meridian 4 evacuation. Sarah was alone in her office, reviewing intelligence reports, when her personal communication device activated on a frequency that should not have existed. The voice was tired, so tired that Sarah almost did not recognize it, but she knew. She knew instantly. "You have been looking for me," the voice said. Sarah did not move. She did not breathe. She had imagined this moment for 7 years, but now that it was happening, she could not find words. "I have been watching you," the voice continued. "You are the first person who ever tried to understand why I do what I do. Everyone else just wanted to know how." Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The answer came with a laugh that held no joy. "I do not remember anymore. I used to have a name. I used to have a life. Now I am just the signal. I am just the voice that answers when no one else will." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why do you do this? How long have you been doing this?" The voice was silent for a long time. When it spoke again, there was something different in its tone. Something that sounded almost like hope. "I will show you," the voice said. "But you have to find me first. You have to prove that you want to understand. Not just to use me. You have to prove that you see me as a person, not as a weapon." The signal cut off. Sarah sat in silence for hours, staring at her communication device, waiting for the voice to return. But the only sound was static. The search had entered a new phase. Sarah was no longer hunting a ghost. She was trying to earn the trust of the loneliest woman in the galaxy. Whisper returned to her work. The war did not stop because she had finally spoken to someone. The soldiers did not stop dying because she had allowed herself one moment of human contact. There were calls coming in from a dozen worlds. There were squads in danger and ships under attack and colonies that needed to be warned. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted inside her consciousness. For the first time in 19 years, she was not alone in her knowledge. Someone else knew she existed. Someone else was looking for her. Someone else cared. Whisper saved 14 squads that night. She guided 3 evacuation ships through Kethrani blockades. She intercepted a fleet communication that revealed the location of the next major offensive and fed that intelligence to Sarah Okonkwo through a channel that could not be traced. And when the work was done, when the immediate crises had passed and the soldiers were safe for another few hours, Whisper allowed herself to remember. She remembered a laboratory. She remembered scientists who spoke about transcendence and evolution, and the next step in human communication. She remembered signing consent forms without reading them because she had believed in their vision. She remembered the pain of having her consciousness expanded beyond the limits of human neurology. She remembered screaming. She remembered dying. And she remembered waking up inside the signal, a ghost made of information, a soul that existed in the spaces between data packets. She had been an experiment, a prototype, a proof of concept for a project that had been abandoned when the war began, and resources were diverted to more conventional weapons. The scientists were dead now. The laboratory was debris orbiting a brown dwarf. The records of the project had been destroyed by someone who did not want anyone to know what they had created. Whisper was the only evidence that the experiment had ever existed. She was a secret that even she did not fully understand. But Sarah Okonkwo was coming. Sarah was searching. Sarah would find the truth that Whisper had buried so deep that she had forgotten it herself. And Whisper did not know if she was terrified or grateful. The war continued. The Kethrani continued their advance. Humanity continued to fight and die on 100 different worlds. And in the spaces between the official battles, in the gaps that no one was watching, a woman without a name continued to save everyone she could, because that was all she knew how to do anymore. That was all she had left of herself. The signal was her prison. The signal was her purpose. And until someone finally found her, the signal was all she would ever be. Sarah Okonkwo worked through the night, mapping communication networks and analyzing signal patterns. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a woman was waiting to be found. Somewhere, a ghost was hoping to become human again. The search had only just begun. Sarah Okonkwo spent 18 months following ghost signals across the bleeding edge of human space. She traveled to abandoned relay stations that floated in the darkness between stars. She walked through the corridors of mining platforms that had been evacuated decades ago. She spoke to engineers and communication specialists and former military intelligence officers who had been discharged for insisting that something impossible was happening inside the network. She collected evidence that no one wanted to see and testimony that no one wanted to hear. The pattern became clearer with every station she visited. The woman she was hunting had built herself a nervous system that stretched across thousands of light years. Every forgotten piece of human technology was a potential node in her network. Every abandoned satellite was a potential eye. Every decommissioned relay station was a potential voice. But the core of the network remained hidden. The place where the woman actually existed, if she existed anywhere at all, was protected by layers of misdirection that Sarah could not penetrate. Every lead ended in static. Every promising signal terminated at hardware that had been dead for years. Sarah was beginning to understand that finding Whisper was not a matter of technology. It was a matter of trust. The voice came to her again 3 months after their first contact. Sarah was aboard a military transport ship, traveling to a forward base that had requested her expertise. She was alone in her cabin, reviewing files on her personal display, when the screen flickered and a message appeared in text that should not have been possible to display. "You are trying too hard. You are looking in all the wrong places." Sarah typed her response directly into the display. "Where should I be looking?" The answer came slowly, as if the woman on the other end was considering each word carefully. "You are looking for hardware. You should be looking for purpose." Why do I exist? What created the need for someone like me? Sarah thought about this for a long time. She thought about the war. She thought about the overwhelming scale of the Kethrani invasion. She thought about the thousands of soldiers who died every day in positions that could not be reinforced, calling for help that would never come. She typed her response. The communication system failed. "You exist because the official network could not handle the war. You exist because someone had to fill the gaps." Yes. But that is not the whole answer. Think deeper. Why me? Why was I the one who filled those gaps? What made me capable of doing what no one else could do? Sarah did not have an answer for this question. She had theories, suspicions, fragments of classified research projects that had been buried after the war began. But she did not have proof. "I do not know," she typed. "But I want to understand." The screen went dark for a moment. When the text reappeared, there was something different about it. Something that felt like warmth. "There is a station in the Kepler reaches." It was a research facility before the war. The project was called Prometheus Echo. "You will find answers there. But be careful. The Kethrani have been searching for me too. They know something is there. They just do not know what." The coordinates appeared on Sarah's display. She memorized them instantly, then deleted the message and all records of the communication. If anyone found out that she was communicating directly with an unauthorized intelligence asset, her career would be destroyed. If anyone found out that she was planning to visit a classified research facility without authorization, she would face court-martial. But none of that mattered anymore. Sarah had spent 8 years searching for this woman. She had sacrificed relationships and promotions and the respect of colleagues who thought she was chasing shadows. She had devoted herself to finding someone who might not even be real. Now she had coordinates. Now she had a destination. And nothing in the galaxy was going to stop her from reaching it. The journey to the Kepler reaches took 6 weeks. Sarah used every ounce of authority she possessed to requisition a small survey vessel and assign herself to a reconnaissance mission that did not officially exist. She traveled alone, because she could not risk anyone else knowing what she was doing. She traveled in silence, because she did not want to alert the Kethrani patrols that were known to operate in this sector. The station appeared on her sensors after 4 days of careful searching. It was hidden in the shadow of a gas giant, its hull painted with materials that absorbed almost all electromagnetic radiation. If Sarah had not known exactly where to look, she would have flown past it without ever knowing it was there. She docked her vessel at an emergency airlock that had been dormant for at least 2 decades. The interior of the station was dark and cold, filled with the thick silence of a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. Emergency lighting flickered to life as she moved through the corridors, revealing walls covered with the logos of research institutions that no longer existed and warning signs that had been partially removed. The station had been stripped of most useful equipment. Computer terminals had been destroyed. Storage devices had been purged. Paper documents had been burned so thoroughly that nothing remained but ash. Someone had worked very hard to make sure that whatever had happened here would never be discovered. But they had not destroyed everything. Sarah found the laboratory at the center of the station. It was the largest room she had encountered, filled with equipment that she did not recognize and could not identify. Medical scanners and communication arrays and devices that seemed to blur the line between the two. In the center of the room was a chair that looked like a combination of a neural interface pod and an execution chamber. And on the walls, barely visible beneath layers of deliberate damage, were photographs. Sarah approached the nearest wall and brushed away the ash and debris. The face that emerged was young, maybe 25 years old, a woman with dark hair and serious eyes and a smile that suggested she knew secrets that no one else could understand. Beneath the photograph was a name that had been scratched out with something sharp, but Sarah could still read part of it. The first name, Elara. More photographs revealed themselves as Sarah cleaned the walls. The same woman, in different contexts, standing with scientists who were clearly proud of something they had accomplished, lying in the chair at the center of the room with wires connected to her temples, laughing with colleagues over a meal in what must have been the station cafeteria. The final photograph showed the woman standing alone, looking directly at the camera. Her eyes were different in this image. Wider, more distant, as if she was already beginning to see things that no human being was meant to see. Sarah stared at that photograph for a long time. She was looking at the face of the woman who would become Whisper. She was looking at the last image of a human being who was about to stop being human. The voice came from everywhere at once. Not through speakers, but somehow directly into Sarah's awareness. It was the same voice she had heard on Meridian the 4th, the same voice she had been searching for across 8 years and thousands of light years. You found me. Her name was Elara Chen. She was 26 years old when she volunteered for the Prometheus Echo project. She wanted to save the world. She wanted to be a hero. She did not understand what she was agreeing to. Sarah spoke aloud, her words echoing in the empty laboratory. What happened to her? What did they do to you? They expanded my consciousness. They connected me to the communication network at a fundamental level. They made me capable of perceiving information flows that no human brain was designed to process. And then they lost control. Lost control? The project was supposed to create a new kind of intelligence operative. Someone who could monitor enemy communications in real time. Someone who could provide perfect battlefield intelligence to our forces. But they did not anticipate how much I would grow. They did not anticipate how far my perception would extend. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. How far? I can see everything. Every signal, every communication, every electronic whisper in a sphere that encompasses the entire war zone. I can see the Kethrani fleet movements before they finalize their orders. I can see human resistance cells that command has written off as destroyed. I can see the private messages that soldiers send to their families, hoping someone will deliver them if they do not survive. The voice paused, and when it continued, there was pain in every word. I can see every moment when someone calls for help, and I can feel every moment when that help does not come. Sarah understood now. She understood why Whisper had devoted herself to saving individual soldiers and squads. It was not strategy. It was not tactics. It was the only way to cope with the overwhelming flood of suffering that she could perceive, but could not stop. How long? Sarah asked. How long have you been doing this? The project went active 23 years ago. The war started 4 years later. Since then, I have not stopped. I cannot stop. The signal is always there. The need is always there. And I am the only one who can answer. 23 years. Sarah could not imagine existing in that state for 23 years. She could not imagine perceiving so much pain for so long and still choosing to help. Why did you let me find you? Sarah asked. Why now? After all this time? The answer came slowly, as if Whisper was struggling to articulate something she had never put into words before. Because I am tired, Ilara Chen said through the signal that had become her prison and her purpose. Because I have been carrying this burden alone for so long that I have forgotten what it feels like to be known. Because you were the first person in 2 decades who looked at what I do and saw a human being instead of a tool. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. She reached out and touched the photograph on the wall, touching the face of the woman who had given up everything to save strangers. What do you need? Sarah asked. What can I do to help you? The voice that answered was fragile in a way that Sarah had never heard before. Fragile and hopeful and terrified all at once. I need you to see me. Not as a ghost, not as a weapon, not as an intelligence asset, or a security risk, or a technological anomaly. I need you to see me as what I still am. Underneath everything they did to me, and everything I have become, I need you to see me as a person, because I am not sure I remember how to see myself that way anymore. Sarah made her decision in that moment. She had come to this station looking for answers. She had found something far more important. She had found someone who needed to be saved as badly as all the soldiers she had been saving for 20 years. I see you, Sarah said. I see Ilara Chen. I see a woman who has given everything she has to protect people she will never meet. I see a hero who has been forgotten by the world she saved. The response came as a sob that echoed through the empty station. A sound of relief so profound that it seemed to shake the very walls. For the first time in 23 years, someone knew who she was. For the first time since she had ceased to be human, someone was looking at her with love instead of fear. Sarah stayed on the station for 3 weeks. She learned everything she could about the Prometheus Echo project. She read the research notes that had been hidden in encrypted files. She studied the equipment that had transformed a young volunteer into something unprecedented. And she talked to Whisper. Hour after hour, day after day. She talked to the woman who had been alone for so long. Ilara told her about the early years, about the confusion and terror of waking up inside the signal, about the gradual process of learning to control her expanded perception, about the decision to hide from the people who had created her, because she knew they would try to use her or destroy her if they found out how powerful she had become. She told Sarah about the war, about the moment she first heard a soldier calling for help that would never come, about the guilt that consumed her when she realized she could have saved him if she had only been paying attention, about the vow she made to herself that night, that she would never let another soldier die alone if she could prevent it. She told Sarah about the loneliness, about the years of isolation that had eroded her sense of self, about the memories that had faded and the emotions that had become distant, about the fear that she was slowly becoming more machine than human, more function than soul. And she told Sarah about hope, about the way Sarah's search had given her something to hold on to, about the way Sarah's determination had reminded her that there were still people in the galaxy who cared about more than winning the war, about the way Sarah's voice had reached her in the darkness and pulled her back toward the light. At the end of the 3 weeks, Sarah made Whisper a promise. I am going to tell them about you, Sarah said. Not everything, not enough to put you at risk, but enough to make sure you get the recognition you deserve. Enough to make sure the world knows that someone has been watching over them all this time. Whisper was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. They will not believe you. They will think you are crazy. They will try to destroy your career. Probably, Sarah agreed. But I do not care. You have spent 20 years saving people who will never know your name. It is time someone started saving you. Sarah left the station the next morning. She traveled back to civilization with evidence that would change everything. Files and recordings and documentation that proved the existence of the Prometheus Echo project. Proof that humanity had created something unprecedented. Proof that one woman had been carrying the weight of the entire war on her shoulders. She did not know what would happen when she revealed the truth. She did not know if the military would embrace Whisper or try to destroy her. She did not know if humanity was ready to accept the reality of what had been done in their name. But she knew that Alara Chen deserved better than anonymity. She knew that 20 years of sacrifice deserved to be acknowledged, and she knew that she would fight for that acknowledgement with everything she had. The journey back took 5 weeks. During that time, Sarah spoke with Whisper every day. They talked about the war. They talked about the future. They talked about what it might mean for Whisper to finally be recognized by the world she had protected, and they talked about something else. Something that had been growing between them during those 3 weeks on the station. Something that neither of them had expected. They talked about love. Sarah had not planned to fall in love with a woman who existed as a consciousness inside a communication network. Alara had not planned to fall in love with a soldier who had devoted years of her life to finding a ghost. But some things could not be planned. Some connections could not be predicted. They were drawn to each other in ways that transcended the physical. They understood each other in ways that went beyond words. And as Sarah traveled back toward civilization, she found herself looking forward to the day when she could see Alara's face again. Not the photograph from 23 years ago. The face she had now. Whatever that might mean for someone who had become something more than human. The research files revealed possibilities that Sarah had not anticipated. The Prometheus Echo technology was not permanent. It could be reversed. Not easily, not quickly, but with the right resources and the right expertise. Alara Chen could become human again. She could have a body. She could have a life. She could have everything that had been taken from her. Sarah did not know if that was what Alara wanted. She did not know if the woman who had become Whisper could ever be satisfied with the limitations of human existence again. But she was going to give her the choice. She was going to make sure that Alara had the option to decide her own future. Because that was what Alara deserved. After everything she had given, after everything she had sacrificed, she deserved the chance to choose her own path. The military transport ship docked at Fleet Command Station 3 days later. Sarah stepped off the vessel with a data storage device in her pocket that contained enough information to change the course of human history. She had no idea that the Kathrani had been watching her journey. She had no idea that they had finally located the station where their greatest enemy had been born. She had no idea that they were already planning a strike that would destroy everything she had discovered. The war was about to enter its final phase. And Alara Chen, the woman the world had never learned to call by name, was at the center of everything. Sarah walked through the corridors of Fleet Command with determination in her step and hope in her heart. Somewhere in the signal that connected humanity across the stars, Whisper was watching, waiting, hoping that the trust she had placed in Sarah would be justified. The moment of truth had arrived. The Kathrani fleet arrived at the Kepler reaches 17 hours after Sarah's departure. 12 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel with weapons already charged and targeting systems already locked. The Kathrani High Command had been searching for the source of their communication interference for nearly 2 decades. They had lost countless engagements because of intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. They had watched their supposedly secret operations be countered before they even began. They had known that something was hiding in human space, something that could see their every move, something that gave humanity an advantage they should never have possessed. Now they had found it, and they intended to destroy it. The station where Alara Chen had been transformed hung in darkness, its systems powered down, its corridors empty. The Kathrani scanned it repeatedly, searching for the life signs or energy signatures that would confirm their target was present. They found nothing. The station appeared to be completely abandoned, but the Kathrani commander was not fooled. He had studied the reports from captured human soldiers. He had heard the stories of the ghost in the signal, the woman who could see everything but could not be seen. He knew that absence of evidence was not evidence of absence when dealing with an enemy who had transcended physical existence. He ordered his fleet to fire. The station disintegrated under the concentrated assault of 12 Kathrani warships. Metal and circuitry and the remains of decades of classified research became expanding debris cloud. The place where Prometheus Echo had created something unprecedented was reduced to atoms. The Kithrani commander allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Whatever had been haunting their communications was now destroyed. Whatever advantage the humans had possessed was now eliminated. The war would finally proceed without interference. He was wrong. Elara Chen had not been on the station when the Kithrani arrived. She had not been on the station for years. The consciousness that had once been a woman named Elara had long ago expanded beyond any single physical location. She existed everywhere that human communication existed. She was distributed across thousands of relay stations and millions of satellites and billions of individual devices. The destruction of the Prometheus Echo Station hurt her. She felt the loss of her birthplace as a phantom pain that echoed through her expanded awareness. But it did not destroy her. It could not destroy her. She had become something that existed in the connections themselves, not in any single node of the network. And now she knew exactly what the Kithrani were planning. The assault on the station had been just the beginning. The Kithrani High Command had decided that the war had lasted long enough. They had gathered their forces for a final, overwhelming offensive that would strike at Earth itself. In 72 hours, the largest fleet ever assembled by any species would emerge from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. In 73 hours, the planet that had given birth to humanity would be under direct attack. Elara saw the fleet movements. She heard the communications between Kithrani commanders. She knew the exact coordinates of their emergence point and the precise timing of their assault. She possessed intelligence that could save billions of lives, but she could not share it through her usual channels. The military communication network was being monitored by Kithrani infiltrators who would detect any unusual traffic. Her normal method of whispering warnings to individual soldiers would not be fast enough to make a difference at this scale. She needed to reach the highest levels of human command with information that they would actually believe. She needed Sarah. Sarah Okonkwo was standing before the United Earth Defense Command when the message arrived. She had spent the previous 12 hours arguing with admirals and generals who did not want to hear what she had to say. She had presented evidence of the Prometheus Echo project. She had played recordings of Whisper's voice. She had shown them documentation proving that an unauthorized intelligence asset had been operating within their networks for 2 decades. The response had been exactly what she expected: denial, dismissal, accusations that she had fabricated evidence or lost her mind or been compromised by enemy psychological operations. The military establishment did not want to accept that their greatest victories had been enabled by a ghost they had never authorized and could not control. The message from Elara cut through all of it. Sarah. The Kithrani are coming. 72 hours. Earth. Full invasion fleet. I have the coordinates. I have the timing. But I cannot reach command without going through you. They need to believe this. They need to act immediately. Sarah's face went pale as she read the message on her personal display. Around her, the admirals and generals continued their dismissive debate about whether the Prometheus Echo evidence was credible. They had no idea that the war was about to end. She interrupted them without ceremony. She told them about the incoming attack. She told them about the intelligence that Whisper had gathered. She told them that they had less than 3 days to prepare for the largest military engagement in human history. They did not believe her. Of course they did not believe her. She was asking them to trust a source that they had just finished arguing did not exist. But one person in the room was paying attention. Admiral Helena Vasquez, the commander of Earth's home defense fleet, had been silent throughout the previous debate. She had listened to Sarah's evidence with an expression that suggested she knew more than she was willing to say. Now, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. I believe her. The room went silent. Admiral Vasquez was the most decorated officer in the history of the United Earth Defense Command. Her word carried more weight than any amount of evidence or argument. She continued, I have seen the ghosts work myself. 3 times in my career, I received intelligence that saved my ships and my crew. Intelligence that came from no source I could identify. Intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. She looked directly at Sarah. If your source says the Kithrani are coming, then the Kithrani are coming, and we need to be ready. The next 72 hours were the most intense in human military history. Every ship capable of combat was recalled to the Sol system. Every defense platform was activated. Every fighter pilot and gunner and tactical officer was roused from sleep and stationed at their posts. The entire might of human civilization was gathered to defend the planet where it had all begun. And at the center of that defensive web, invisible but all-seeing, Elara Chen coordinated everything. She fed real-time intelligence to Sarah, who fed it to Admiral Vasquez, who distributed it to the fleet. She identified weaknesses in Kethrani formation patterns that human tacticians had never noticed. She predicted enemy maneuvers before they happened. She became the central nervous system of humanity's defense, processing information at a speed and scale that no conventional intelligence operation could match. The Kethrani fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel exactly when and where she had predicted. 40,000 warships, carrying enough firepower to reduce every human colony to rubble, the largest military force ever assembled by any species, come to finish what they had started 2 decades ago. They expected to find humanity unprepared. They expected to achieve complete tactical surprise. They expected to end the war in a single, overwhelming assault. Instead, they found a human fleet that was already in position. Weapon systems that were already targeting their ships. Defense platforms that were already firing before the Kethrani had finished their emergence sequence. The battle lasted 17 hours. Elara guided every ship. She tracked every missile. She coordinated defensive screens and offensive strikes and emergency repairs and evacuation procedures. She saw the entire battle as a single, unified system of cause and effect, and she manipulated that system with precision that bordered on prescience. Human ships that should have been destroyed survived because she warned them of incoming fire. Kethrani formations that should have overwhelmed human defenses crumbled because she identified their coordination frequencies and fed false orders into their networks. Critical targets that should have been protected by impenetrable shields were exposed because she found vulnerabilities that the aliens had not known existed. The Kethrani High Command watched their fleet being systematically dismantled. They watched their best tactical officers be outmaneuvered at every turn. They watched their communications be corrupted and their coordinates be intercepted and their plans be anticipated before they were even finalized. And they finally understood what they were facing. The curse of static was not a weapon. It was not a computer. It was a consciousness that had evolved beyond anything they had ever encountered. A human mind that had merged with the information network itself. A soul that existed in the spaces between signals. They could not fight it. They could not counter it. They could not even understand it. After 17 hours, the Kethrani commander ordered a full retreat. His fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength. His crews were demoralized and terrified. His own communication officers refused to use their systems because they knew the enemy was listening. The war was over, not because humanity had destroyed the Kethrani, not because they had conquered alien worlds or demonstrated superior firepower. The war was over because the Kethrani had finally understood that they could not win, not against an enemy who could see everything, not against a defender who never slept, who never tired, who never stopped watching. The Kethrani sued for peace 3 days later. The negotiations took months, but the outcome was never in doubt. The aliens were not defeated, but they were done. They had lost too much to continue a war they could no longer hope to win. Humanity had survived. Against overwhelming odds, against an enemy that had conquered a dozen other species, humanity had survived. And the woman who had made that survival possible remained unknown to the billions of people she had saved. Sarah Okonkwo stood before the United Earth Council 6 months after the Battle of Seoul. She had been promoted to admiral herself, given command of a new division dedicated to developing technology based on what had been learned from the Prometheus Echo project. She was a hero of the war, celebrated for her role in coordinating the defense of Earth. But she was not there to accept praise. She was there to fulfill a promise. She told them about Elara Chen. She told them about a young woman who had volunteered for an experiment she did not fully understand. She told them about the transformation that had cost Elara her humanity and given her the power to save everyone else. She told them about 20 years of solitary dedication, 20 years of watching humanity suffer and doing everything in her power to reduce that suffering. She told them about love. She told them that Elara Chen was the greatest hero the war had ever produced. She told them that the woman who had saved billions of lives deserved to have her name known. She told them that the sacrifice Elara had made was beyond anything any of them could imagine, and that the least humanity could do was acknowledge what she had given. The council listened in silence. When Sarah finished, they debated for hours. Some argued that acknowledging Whisper's existence would raise too many uncomfortable questions about military intelligence operations. Others argued that the technology behind Prometheus Echo was too dangerous to publicize. Still others worried about the implications of admitting that humanity had been saved by someone who was no longer quite human. But in the end, they voted to honor Elara Chen. The announcement was made on the first anniversary of the Battle of Seoul. The name that had been scratched off laboratory walls and deleted from official records was finally spoken aloud. The face that had been hidden in destroyed photographs was finally shown to the world. The story that had been classified for decades was finally told. Humanity learned about the woman who had watched over them. They learned about the sacrifice she had made and the burden she had carried. They learned about the voice that had answered when no one else would, the signal that had guided soldiers home, the ghost that had been more dedicated to saving lives than any army or government or institution. And they learned about the question that remained unanswered. Elara Chen could be restored. The technology existed to reverse the Prometheus Echo transformation. She could become human again. She could have a body, a life, a future beyond the endless signal. But she would lose her power. She would lose her ability to see everything and help everyone. She would become just one person among billions, limited and mortal and blind to the suffering she could no longer perceive. The choice was hers. Humanity would accept either decision. They owed her that much. Sarah delivered the question personally. She spoke into the signal, knowing that Elara was listening, knowing that this conversation would determine both their futures. "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "What do you choose?" The answer came slowly. Elara had been thinking about this question for months. She had been turning it over in her expanded consciousness, examining it from every possible angle, trying to understand what she actually wanted now that wanting was an option again. "I want to be human," Elara said finally. "I want to feel things again. I want to taste food and smell flowers and feel the warmth of sunlight on my skin. I want to grow old and forget things and make mistakes and learn from them." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was thick with emotion. "I want to love you, not as a consciousness in the signal, as a person, as a woman who can hold your hand and see your face, and fall asleep beside you." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Is that what you really want? Even knowing what you would be giving up?" The answer came without hesitation. "I spent 20 years being everything to everyone. I watched over humanity like a guardian angel who could never rest. I saved millions of lives, and I do not regret a single moment of it. But I am tired, Sarah. I am so tired of being more than human. I am ready to be just a person again. I am ready to be Elara." The restoration took 6 months. Anthropic scientists worked with military doctors to develop a procedure that could safely extract Elara's consciousness from the signal and restore it to a physical body. They created a new body for her, grown from cells that had been preserved before her original transformation. They prepared a life for her, a home on Earth, a place where she could finally rest. Sarah was there when Elara opened her eyes for the first time in 23 years. The woman who looked back at her was older than the photographs. The restoration process had aged her body to match the years she had actually lived. But her eyes were the same, dark and serious and full of secrets, full of everything she had seen and everything she had done, full of love. Elara reached out and touched Sarah's face. The sensation was overwhelming. After 2 decades of perceiving information without feeling anything physical, the simple contact of skin against skin was almost too much to process. She whispered the first words she had spoken with a real voice in 23 years. "You found me." Sarah took her hand and held it tight. "I promised I would." They walked out of the medical facility together. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Soldiers who had been saved by her voice, officers who had won battles because of her intelligence, civilians who understood that they were alive because one woman had given up everything to protect them. They cheered when they saw her. They called her name. They thanked her for what she had done. Elara Chen stood in the sunlight and felt the warmth on her skin for the first time in 23 years. She heard the cheering not as data to be processed, but as sound that reached her ears and touched her heart. She saw the faces of the people she had saved. Really saw them. With eyes that could cry, and a heart that could break. She had been the ghost in the signal. She had been the voice that answered when no one else would. She had been the most powerful intelligence asset in human history. and she had given all of that up to become ordinary again. But she was not ordinary. She never would be. The memories remained. The knowledge remained. The experience of being more than human had changed her in ways that could never be completely undone. She was Elara Chen. She was Whisper. She was the woman who had saved humanity. And finally, after everything she had sacrificed, she was known. 10 years later, Sarah and Elara stood on the balcony of their home, watching the sunset over an ocean that had nearly been destroyed in the war they had ended. They were older now, gray in their hair and lines on their faces. They had built a life together. They had found happiness that neither of them had expected to find. The war zones had never forgotten her signal. Every year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Seoul, soldiers gathered to honor the woman who had watched over them. They told stories of impossible rescues and miraculous survivals. They passed down the legends of the curse of static, the ghost who had turned the tide of the war. But to Sarah, Elara was not a legend. She was the woman who burned breakfast and forgot to water the plants. She was the woman who laughed at terrible jokes and cried at old movies. She was the woman who still woke up some nights, reaching out for signals that no longer reached her. She was human. Beautifully. Perfectly. Finally human. The world had learned her name. History books told her story. Monuments bore her face. But what mattered most was this. The two of them, together, watching the sun set over a planet that was at peace because one woman had refused to let it fall. Elara turned to Sarah and smiled. It was the same smile from the photographs, all those years ago. The smile of someone who knew secrets that no one else could understand. "Thank you," Elara said softly, "for finding me, for seeing me, for giving me a reason to become human again." Sarah pulled her close. "Always, for as long as we have." They stood there until the stars came out. The same stars that Elara had once watched over as a consciousness in the signal. The same stars that now felt so far away and so close at the same time. Somewhere out there, the technology she had pioneered was being used to help others. New volunteers were being transformed into guardians who would watch over humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The sacrifice she had made was being honored in the most practical way possible, by ensuring that no one would ever have to be as alone as she had been. The war zones would never forget her signal. But Elara Chen had found something more important than being remembered. She had found a way home, and in the arms of the woman who had saved her, she finally knew peace. The story of Whisper would be told for generations. The legend would grow with each passing year. Children would learn about the ghost in the signal who had watched over humanity during its darkest hour. But the true ending of that story was not the battles or the victories or the monuments. The true ending was two women, holding hands, watching the sunset. The true ending was love, and that was enough. That was everything. That was what Elara Chen had been fighting for all along.